All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kate Gray. I am the Chief Experience Officer at the Marketing Science Institute. MSI is a nonprofit organization that brings together top marketers and academics. We stay at the forefront of marketing science and research by providing highly focused research data and industry-leading events that help businesses stay at the forefront of an ever-changing environment. I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Neil Morgan is Professor and PetSmart Distinguished Chair of Marketing at Indiana University. His research interests span marketing and strategic management issues, but mainly focus on marketing strategy implementation and the linkages between marketing-related resources and capabilities and firm performance. His current research projects focus on marketing performance assessment, the role of the CMO and the marketing department, and marketing's role in enhancing efficiency and brand management and CRM capabilities. Neil has extensive experience collaborating with companies from a wide range of industries, and at the end, he'll highlight opportunities for further discussion and collaboration, and I'm sure we'll be available to take additional questions and discussion. So with that, please help me welcome Neil, and we'll turn it over to him to get started.
Cool. Thanks. You can hear me, right, Kate?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, just checking. If things can go wrong, they usually do when technology meets me. Hi, everyone. As Kate said, my name's Neil Morgan. I'm sat in my basement in Bloomington, Indiana, which you can see behind me. I just wanted to prove to you I am an academic, so you can see books and journals and stuff everywhere. And I also want you to pay particular attention to the fact that I had my hair cut for this event. They opened up last week, and so I told Kate earlier that if I end up getting COVID, it's your fault. So what I'm going to talk about today is a project that is group work. Hang on, I've already screwed up because now all of a sudden my machine has gone into hang. Okay, now it's back. So let me try this again. Okay, looking good? Okay, I can see it up on the screen, so hopefully it's back. So this is, I'm going to talk about designing next generation marketing organizations. This is a project that I got involved with a bunch of other guys. Omar Rodriguez Villa and Sundar Bhardwaj, both of whom are kind of academics, except Omar used to be a real person. So he had a long career at Coke before he went off to become an academic. And then two other people, Shubhu Mitra and Peter Shellstraight, both of whom were also senior executives at Coca-Cola and now have left and are doing kind of other things. So you've got three academics and kind of two real people is the message here in terms of what I'm going to talk to you about today. And so what I'm going to talk to you about, and I'm going to use an acronym, and the acronym I'm going to use is MARS. And so when I talk about designing for the next generation, things have fundamentally changed over the last 10 years for marketing. And we use the acronym MARS to talk about kind of some of the major changes in technology, because it's mostly technology enabled. Some of the major changes in technology that have led to this shift in marketing organizations and the need to shift marketing organizations over the last decade. So I'm going to talk about MARS, and so we started with thinking about kind of mobile and AI and analytics and real time and social, and increasingly also not just social but societal. And so we're going to use the acronym MARS just as a way of talking about all of these kind of new technologies that have emerged over the last 10 or 15 years that have had a fundamental impact on what happens in a marketing organization. And so whenever I talk about MARS, that's kind of what I mean. Like the new technologies that have enabled kind of a lot of change. And so the genesis of this project actually came from a request by the Mobile Marketing Association, which some of you may know. I'll give them a shout out because the Mobile Marketing Association kind of represents, hundreds, maybe even thousands now, of companies who were kind of grappling, particularly to begin with how do we deal with mobile, but increasingly that became a kind of a broader industry group around thinking about technologies. And so they came to us with an ask And the ask was, can you help some of our member companies figure out how they should be thinking about how they should be dealing with the new Mars landscape, kind of from an org design kind of a perspective, right? And so that kind of was the genesis of what this project was. And so this evolved into what I'll talk about as kind of a 2-year research odyssey, where we have talked to a lot, hundreds of senior managers across, getting on for close to 100 companies now. And you'll see some of the companies listed there. Some of you are representatives of some of those companies. So some folks in your organizations were actually part of the kind of the research. And really it was a deep qualitative dive into asking questions about the challenges that organizations were facing as a result of these new technologies. Some of the things they thought they were doing well, some of the things they had particular challenges with. And so this, and we have, I think I've got some details here. So I think we're up to 140 now. This is a kind of an old slide, but across kind of 100 plus companies. And we were very deliberate in thinking about the kinds of companies we wanted to talk to, because we wanted to make sure that we had a kind of a spread. So we had kind of some companies who thought they were doing well on the digital spectrum, some companies not so, who kind of laggards, some companies that were doing really well just financial performance wise, others that were not doing so great. And we talked primarily to kind of folks who were running marketing organizations, whatever their job title was, some chief growth officers, but also some kind of what we would call area specialists. So chief digital officers, for example, a couple of CIOs. We talked to some CEOs as we were going through. So that's just to give you some background in terms of what I'm going to share with you today, kind of where that stuff comes from. So when we asked the first question, or when we got into the kind of the research, and we started thinking about and talking to people about kind of what what's happened as a result of these Mars technologies. I mean, what is it that's fundamentally changed? And there are kind of 3 buckets of answers that we got when we were talking to folks across organizations. And so those 3 buckets are about, there's been an impact directly on customers and what their expectations are. There's been an impact on us as an organization competitively, because it's enabled new forms of competition. It's lowered barriers to entry to marketplaces. And thirdly, it's changed both how we need to try and operate as a marketing organization, but also it's changed expectations, or what the ask is from kind of the CEO level about what they want from a marketing organization. And so just to give you some kind of a flavor of what this looks like. So customer expectations. Over the last decade, I fly a lot, like I guess you guys, or I used to fly a lot, I guess, like you guys. And I live, my nearest airport's Indianapolis. So I'm a Delta guy, because Delta flies more direct flights out of Indianapolis than anywhere else. And so, you know, when I get on a Delta airline flight, and if I get on a flight to Shanghai, which I do more frequently than I would like to do, then my expectations about what they will know about me and what they will enable me to do on an aircraft is fundamentally different than it was a decade ago, right? And so you can think about very simple things like, I expect to be able to use my own screen. I used to say I didn't want to touch a screen that other people have touched. I'll say that's exponentially even more true today than it was 3 months ago. And I want to be able to watch what I want to watch in their entertainment system. I want to make sure that they're tracking my profile. When they ask me a question about, do I want a glass of wine, I expect them to know that I tend to have wine both before and after dinner, and not offer me a liqueur. I mean, these are just a set of expectations that I now have, all of which are digitally enabled in the sense that they have information about these things on their handheld that they didn't have before. So they know who I am, they know what my preferences are, and I have expectations about those things. But there's also some things where, there's also some things where they're able to do things for me that I didn't expect to begin with, but now maybe I do. Right? So one thing, for example, sending me a text message to tell me, you know, A, my flight is on time, but B, there is roadworks between me and the airport, and therefore I might want to leave 30 minutes early. Not something I initially had expectations on, but now in a kind of a digitally enabled world, that's something they've been able to deliver. And when they do deliver that, now all of a sudden they have expectations on those things. And by the way, if Delta can do those things, why can't United? And we had an interesting conversation with another airline based in Latin America. And the CMO in that airline said, not only are customer expectations going up from one airline to another, but increasingly expectations are morphing from one category to another. So an interesting conversation with 3M, B2B example. And I was pushing them pretty hard on kind of omni-channel stuff and why it was so difficult for them to do that, right, in their B2B side of their business. And the head of their marketing organization said, you know, one of the things that we keep hearing is, if Amazon can deliver in 24 hours, why can't you? Completely different business. They're thinking about Amazon delivering to them as consumers, changing expectations, not only expectations going up, not only expectations about different things, but those expectations are morphing from one category to another. So change on customer expectations. Effect on competition. And you know, this is easy stuff to talk about, but you know, the digitally enabled technologies have lowered barriers to entry into all sorts of marketplaces. You've had digital natives, very often asset light, attacking you know, traditional CPG types of businesses, you know, Gillette and L'Oreal, but also, you know, other types of businesses like Marriott facing, you know, brand new business models, digitally enabled, you know, Airbnb being a classic example, Oyo being kind of a newer one, which is kind of like an Airbnb for small hotels. And they actually use that analog. Right? So it's lowered barriers to entry. It means that who you used to think about as competition, or who you used to worry about, now you worry about everybody. And people you've never heard of being able to come into your space and kind of disrupt what you do. And we can all snipe, and I do as much the same way as you do. We can all snipe about, yes, they're asset light, and yes, they're VC backed, and yes, what that means is they don't have to make any money, and yes, what that means is they can sell at lower price points than we do. And at some point it's going to come back and bite them, and maybe it will come back and bite them, and some of the people we may think about it, that's kind of already happening. But that doesn't alter the fact that they damage your business in the meantime, and that can last for periods of years. So lower barriers to entry, new competitors, new types, new forms of competition. And what was interesting to us was, because we talked to digital natives as well as what we might call kind of legacy firms, what was interesting to us was that one of the first things that legacy firms wanted to do was to try and figure out what these guys were doing so that they could kind of copy it. and so, you know, everybody would take trips off to California and go visit with Google and go hang at Apple and, you know, go see how they treat their employees and all those kinds of things. And something interesting happened. And what was interesting was that everybody was trying to figure out what the digital natives were doing so that they could copy it. And in the meantime, the digital natives started moving towards more traditional models, right? Not just going from online to offline, but also starting to scratch their heads and think about some of the things that they needed to do, some of the more traditional marketing activities, you know, brand building, mass advertising, right? Some of those are the things that they'd never done in the past in order to continue to grow, and in order, particularly if they hoped to be profitable at some point, then they had to start acquiring some of the kind of the old world marketing skills. So when we started talking about, you know, what's like, when we started talking about, you know, the marketing on Mars, we had this idea that maybe Mars was this new planet, and that marketing was different on Mars. But it turns out while everyone was going to, you know, trying to go to Mars, the Martians were actually moving towards Earth. And they were coming back the other way. So maybe we're somewhere in the middle. Maybe this is really about marketing on the moon, not about marketing on Mars. But Mars is still a good way of, just a shorthand way of thinking about these new digitally enabled kinds of technologies. The third piece of the third bucket where we came across the most changes, and I'll talk about some of the operational challenges, but was really about what the ask was of marketing organizations from CEOs. And we used to kind of compare and contrast between what we called a kind of a mass world and the Mars world, the new digitally enabled. And 15 years ago, if you were a brand manager at the Coca-Cola company, then you kind of knew what your job was, right? And you knew what the risks involved were. And the risks were you kind of didn't hit your case numbers, or you didn't hit your market share numbers, or whatever that was, right? And by the way, if you weren't hitting your numbers, then at least from a profit perspective, you could still dial some of that back because most of your costs were variable, right? And so, media distribution, those kinds of things, particularly in media, you could dial back some spend if you needed to do that, if you needed to save some money. And you had some boffins sat in the lab somewhere coming up with some new stuff, some new flavors, and your job was to go promote the heck out of that. In a Mars world, the expectations about what companies want from their marketing organizations seem to be pretty fundamentally different. Right? It used to be we were about brand management, now we're about growth management. Where's the growth coming from? Here's your growth objectives. How are you going to get to that? The risks are no longer about not just making your numbers, but they're about environmental things. They're about things like, am I going to have a data breach? Or is someone going to be, is someone using my product in an inappropriate way going to become a meme on social media overnight? Right? What we call kind of environmental risks. And the costs have also fundamentally shifted. It used to be dominated by variable costs. Now we're investing in technology, we're investing in data, we're bringing a lot of production in-house. So a lot of those things are actually fixed costs. And the variable cost component of that stuff has gone down fairly dramatically. Right? And it's no longer about kind of, promoting the innovation that gets created somewhere else in the company. People are asking about, well, you're the marketing folks, where's the growth coming from? Talk to me about business model innovation. So fundamentally changed expectations about what CEOs want from their marketing organizations. So the challenge is fine. Everyone's sitting there kind of, nodding. Yeah, okay, I kind of recognize that stuff, right? And the next question was, if you've got these fundamentally new set of customer expectations, competitive landscape, CEO expectations about marketing organizations, how are marketing organizations changing and adapting to fit, if you want to use that phrase, with the kind of the Mars environment, right? And so one of the first things that we observed was, with every new piece of digital technology that comes along, what tends to happen is it gets evaluated to some degree, and then it gets added to your marketing organization. So you started off with a fairly simple marketing organization, and you had a media team and you had a brand team if you're coming from a kind of a legacy CPG kind of a world. But now all of a sudden, you get a content marketing team. So we need a content marketing team. So let's go get some content marketing folks. Let's organize those. And now we need a social team. And maybe within the social team, we have to have, a TikTok group versus a Facebook group, because Facebook is more than just social. And now we're going on omni-channel. So now we need some performance marketers. So now we need a performance marketing team. And every new piece of technology that comes along, maybe gets evaluated to some degree, but most of it ends up being kind of bolted onto the marketing organization. And there are kind of two reasons for that. And I'll get into some of the others, but two big reasons. Number one is kind of a fear of missing out. Right? If I say no to influencer marketing, or I say no to podcasts, or if I pass on Quibi, am I going to be missing the next big thing? Is someone else going to jump on that before I do? And will I be able to play catch up? So kind of a fear of missing out thing. The other piece of it is kind of a fear of being blindsided, right? And what I mean by blindsided is that maybe it's a piece of technology that someone will be able to use to invade your marketplace, right? It's some kind of disruptive technology. And so what both of those things mean is the fear of getting it wrong means most of the time you think, I have to try and use this technology somehow. The real question is, do I insource it or outsource it? And if I think it's important enough potentially to insource, then I need a team. And even if I outsource it, I need someone to manage it. And so every time you do this, you keep adding these specialisms with increasingly specialized people in them. You keep adding them to your marketing organization. And inevitably what happens as a result of that is you end up with a huge amount of fragmentation in your marketing org, and a huge amount of confusion. I mean, just trying to manage this stuff it is really, really hard. And so some of the things that we, this is kind of survey data, we did a survey, I think it was last year. And so we kind of asked the question, well, how satisfied are you with the operating effectiveness of your marketing organization? Because we were seeing all sorts of challenges, and we suspected it was widespread. And we just wanted to get a data point. And what we found was that only 20% of managers were satisfied with the and these, we're talking, C-level CMOs, whoever's running marketing organizations, senior marketing folks in organizations. Only 20% of managers in large firms were satisfied with the operating effectiveness of their marketing organizations. And what's even more interesting is that if we just do a cut of this and we do a subset where we just look at the digital natives, the number goes all the way up to about 22. Right, so it's not like the digital natives have got this stuff cracked. Everyone's kind of in the same. They may have come from a different place, but everyone's kind of in the same boat now. And so these are some of the kind of the commonly observed tensions that we see in marketing organizations. And before I kind of talk to you about some of these, I'm gonna ask if we can put an online poll out there, because it'll be interesting for me just to calibrate, because just how many of you folks have seen these or recognize these things inside of the organizations, right? And so so what I'm talking about here is things like, I thought I knew what my role was, but it's now really, really hard for me to define exactly where my role ends and somebody else's begins, particularly when you get into kind of the technology end of this. So and sometimes where you get into the sales piece of this as well, between what I'm supposed to be responsible for somebody else. Marketing divided is a kind of a classic. What's interesting about importing specialists and adding specialisms into your marketing organization is you want them because they're specialists. They know how to do stuff that nobody else does. And you want them to continue to do that. But very often they're trained differently. They come from different backgrounds. They speak different languages, or they use the same words to kind of mean different things. And one of the things that we see one of the most obvious manifestations of this is between, what started to be called brand marketing versus performance marketing, right? Performance marketing, funnels, acquisition, retention, omni-channel kinds of approaches, attribution models, brand managers, top of funnel, awareness, satisfaction, just a very different way of thinking about very different training, very different people, very different way of thinking about how they do their work. And you see some of these tensions between these different types of manifestations of pockets of specialists, right? And we got data. we got lots of data. We got 17 times more data than we had before. We got third-party data, we got second-party data, we got first-party data, we got data integration, and we got lots of data. And we don't necessarily have much more insight than we had before. And okay, so a new thing comes along. There's a new attribution modeling approach. Should we be doing that in-house, or is that something I should be using a vendor to do? Executive at P&G said, don't outsource what you don't understand. You look at MarTech, there's lots of stuff you don't understand. You can't insource everything. And if you do insource everything, then the whole mess becomes even worse, right? Tech is eating strategy. You show a CFO an attribution model where if you spend X, you get Y back tomorrow. And then you talk to him about a multi-year platform building umbrella advertising campaign. Guess which one the CFO wants to spend more money on? Now, the pot of money is not getting any bigger, but the more measurable something it is, human nature, the more measurable it is from the attribution perspective, the more you shift money in that direction. Well, what about the medium-term stuff and the longer-term stuff that maybe is harder to measure, but is really important from a strategy perspective? Data quality. How believable is it? All this third-party data, all the walled garden properties. I mean, how much confidence do we have in that data? Particularly if we're paying people on the basis of that data, and it's in their interest that the data says something. So you have a whole incentive alignment kind of an issue, right? Which piece of MarTech? Ooh, this new thing coming along, is that an important thing or a non-important thing? Should we use it or should we not? Should we insource it or should we outsource it? And ultimately where you end up with this stuff, I think, is we have this thing about you keep adding, right? People talk about transforming marketing and marketing transformations. Most of what they mean is adding stuff. As I commented to someone, which got played back to me in various other places, was, more of everything is not a strategy. You have to make choices about what to do and what not to do, and for all of the best reasons in the world, CMOs are finding it really, really difficult to figure out what to say no to, and what not to do, and keep adding things, which just exacerbates the problem, right? And so I'm looking at the kind of the poll results, and so okay, so some of these things you folks recognize. A lot more than others, right? So the blurring of the boundaries is a big deal. Data rich, insights poor, more than half of you. Worries about the quality of data, 80% of folks, 100% of folks. Role blurring, right? So most times that I talk about this stuff with folks, people start nodding their heads. So these are kind of, I think these are pretty commonly. I think we have a good list. I think these really are things that happen a lot in lots of organizations, right? And so symptoms are easy. Figuring out what's causing it, harder. Right? And so one of the things that we think, and this is a very almost a facile way of framing this, but one of the problems that we see with kind of marketing transformation efforts, which is really just a fancy way of saying efforts of marketing organizations to adjust to this kind of new Mars environment. There are two kind of pieces, and one precedes the other for this root cause. And number one says, we're trying to transform when we don't have both a clear and an agreed on destination in mind. We don't have a good articulation about what we want things to look like at some point in the future. And until you know what you want something to look like in the future, until you've got a kind of a clear and agreed on destination, really, really hard to figure out a kind of a route map to get from A to B when you don't know or agree on necessarily, because very often you end up with different people thinking you want different things. And so, and so if I say, well, nobody in their right minds would set off without a clear and agreed on direction and a map for how to get there. And you all nod, right? And I have a phrase that I use with executive and MBA students. If you say it out loud and it sounds stupid, it probably is, right? Nobody in their right minds would do this. But that assumes there's an alternative. And what I mean when I say that is that assumes that people know what the alternative destinations may look like, in a way that they can articulate and argue about which of them might be the right one before they set off on this journey. And a phrase that lived on in my head, a CMO said to me, Neil, I would love to make a choice, but I don't know what the options look like anymore. And I have to say, I have a huge degree of sympathy with that, right? And not least because if you think about, oh, and my machine's gone into hang again. Okay, there you go. Let's try this again. So a quick kind of a hand raise poll, right? How many of you think that your organization has both a clear and agreed on view of what they want their marketing organization to look like in the future, and also a clear action plan for how you're going to get there. And while you're doing the hand raise, because I think I can see the hand raise results over here, right? I started this by saying it's hard. Right? It's easy to say, and clearly it's very, very hard to do. And one of the reasons is, if you just think about the range of different marketing activities or marketing capabilities that you need to decide which ones you're going to do, which ones you're going to do better than others, which ones you're going to do in-house and out of house, which ones are the most important, that if you just think about the panoply, the range of all of those different things, and every time I show this chart or show this slide, you know, I keep adding new ones, right? Because new things keep emerging all of the time. And so it's really, really hard to make choices about which of these things you need to dial up, dial down, do, not do, in-source, outsource, all of those things. So that's what we called, and we came up with this phrase that people really liked, so I'm just going to share it with you, what we call the fog of Mars. Right? That on the one hand, I know I need a clear, agreed on destination. I know I need a roadmap to get there. On the other hand, it is very, very, with everything that is going on, it is very, very unclear what the options are, what the options I need to choose between. So what I'm going to share with you is some thoughts about some frameworks, and ultimately I'll get to a little bit of kind of tools about how to start thinking about that. Right? And so I'll start with, you know, a statement of the obvious, and the statement of the obvious says, well, let's choose a destination. Okay, and let's choose a destination together so that we agree on what that destination is. If the options are not clear, how do you clarify what the options might be in a Mars kind of an enabled world? Okay? So I'm going to talk about. We're going to start with a fundamental concept, and the fundamental concept with marketing folks. The fundamental concept is value. Start with a marketing value proposition. If I want to figure out what the destination for my marketing organization is going to be in a way that I can get people to buy into and agree about, what does that look like? And so we're going to use the concept of value in order to build. Lots of you are familiar with kind of, you know, value propositions. This is a marketing value proposition. What's a value proposition for the marketing organization look like? And so there are two kind of big components to this. Number one is kind of on the customer side, so we can talk about what we call a customer value equation. What is it that in a digitally enabled world with all of these new Mars technologies, what is it that I can now do differently than I did before? What does that look like in terms of customer value expectations from a customer perspective? And on the other side, we're going to talk about company value. So again, in kind of a Mars enabled world, what are the different ways in which the marketing organization can, above and beyond delivering value to customers, what is it that the marketing organization can deliver in terms of value contribution to the rest of the organization? So our observation is, and we think there are kind of three major areas where Mars has had a fundamental impact on customer value expectations, or types of sources of value in the marketplace. And by the way, I'll preface this by saying, I'm not saying products don't matter anymore. I'm not saying quality is not important anymore. I'm not saying price is not important anymore. We call those kind of foundational things. Those things are as important as they've ever been. But increasingly, they're kind of table stakes. Right? They're not enough for you to be able to win, particularly in kind of a Mars-enabled world. And so the three kind of areas where we think that have been most affected by the Mars technologies are these three buckets or three types of new value creation for customers that we call exchange value, experience value, and engagement value. Right? And I'll talk to you a little bit about kind of each one of those. So the exchange value is, and we use a shorthand for thinking about that, is really about personalization. It's really about being able to identify, as a customer goes on a journey, when they're looking for something, the problem they're seeking to solve, and the offers they are most likely to respond to based on your understanding of them and their history. And so this is about kind of being able to develop or having a warehouse of, here's our product, here's a range of products, here's a range of offerings, here's a range of price points, being able to figure out when a customer is looking, know enough about that customer to know what they're most likely to be able to respond, they're most likely to respond to, whether it's because you know that customer or because you're using, propensity score matching and lookalike audiences in order to be able to predict. But that you're decreasing the amount of time and effort the customer's going to have to engage in order to have an offering that kind of is close to what they want, right? So we're not talking about complete customization, but we are talking about many more products, many more messages, many more price points, many more communication vehicles than we've had in the past, and about trying to figure out how to match our understanding of what that customer is doing and looking for with what it is that we can serve up that is the most likely to be closest to that, right? So we talk about that as personalization. A good example up here is Allstate. I think, Allstate, we talked with Allstate. Allstate now has hundreds of different, they were like everyone else, right? They had a traditional segmentation model. Here's what the segmentation model looks like. For this segment, we have this offering. For that segment, we have that offering. Now they have hundreds of product offerings. And the not different for every single individual, so it's not customization, it's personalization, but now they have hundreds of offerings. And I'm talking about products, I'm talking about communications, I'm talking about price points, I'm talking about where people want to buy from, and so it's about trying to match those things. And Mars Technologies has enabled us to do that matching process earlier and better than we've ever been able to do it, right? And increasingly, again, these things, once one company is able to do it, it kind of changes the expectation set of what customers have, right? Experience value. So experience value, we're talking about convenience. And that's kind of the shorthand way in which we think about that. And so we can think about that in two ways. Number one is expanding our view of what the customer journey is. So starting earlier, ending later. And number two is not just figuring out frictions or pain points in that customer journey in ways that you can kind of try and resolve, but also being able to make the journey more enjoyable. I think there's kind of an absence of negatives plus a kind of a positive side to this stuff. And actually, I think Delta, hurting at the moment, I suspect going to come out of this better than most of the others from a resiliency perspective. Partly because of this, right? Their ability to give me value-added insight information through a digital device that tells me where my bag is when I don't even ask. That tells me that there's a traffic jam on the freeway between me and the airport, therefore I need to leave 15 minutes earlier. I mean, that's value-added kind of stuff, right? Above and beyond traditional ways of thinking about absence of frictions. And the third one we call engagement value. And so engagement value is about increasing both the functional and the symbolic meaning of your product or service offering, either your company or your brand, right? And so you can think about, from a functional perspective, what that really means is about connecting communities of customers who can help each other figure out how to use your products better. And if they trust you enough, then not only will they do that, but they'll kind of share with you, and you will be able to observe, and that will help you kind of fix problems with your product sets or change your out-of-box experience or whatever it is in the category in which you work, right? So the example that we have up here is Glossier. So Glossier is an example of a digital native, creating a community of users who help figure out how to use cosmetics and to create cosmetics and enable Glossier to create cosmetics as a result of that, and help each other to use those cosmetics in ways that they feel better about. So three different buckets and I'm giving you examples of kind of each of these, but usually this is not a choice that you make which says I'm just going to do kind of one of these. Is usually kind of some combination of what we call these three value stacks from a customer perspective. And so I take an example, Chobani, of this kind of three stack thinking. Chobani is clearly a company that kind of majors in engagement, right? A disruptive company coming to the category, shake up the category, immigrant story, buy a factory that is going out of business and is no longer going to be used, to rejuvenate a category. A little bit of experience value, service side, in terms of, they've got the cafe and stuff. But the engagement value is not just about the engagement with consumers, but is also an engagement story with food startups, right? And entrepreneurs. And I know the story about the origins of this stuff, but so do consumers, right? So this is part of their kind of increase in meaning of what they're talking, of what they're doing. So in our language, we say, from a customer value perspective, Chobani is majoring in engagement value and kind of minoring in the experience stuff, right? Just Fab, completely the opposite, right? Just Fab is really about having a huge assortment of kind of fashion footwear, and figuring out how to best identify which consumers are going to respond most favorably to which ones. Right? And that's the fundamental part of their business, right? A little bit of the experience stuff, but majoring in exchange, minoring in experience. Delta, I think, classic example of kind of experience focused, figuring out pain points, removing them before you've got them, giving you some little delight factors, expanding the notion of the journey. They're increasingly now talking about being in the journey business as opposed to being in the airline business. So how can they help you make sure you can get your baggage at the end of it in your hotel and not just you pick it up at the airport? That kind of expansion of thinking about the customer journey. Right? And so a very good example of that. But clearly trying to get better at the omni-channel stuff. Matching up offerings at the right time to the right place, and some engagement value, hoping that connecting people at Diamond Medallion, will talk about them in various ways to increase the meaning value of them. What I like about this is we're talking about kind of configurations of customer value, right? And again, I'm not saying product doesn't matter, I'm not saying pricing doesn't matter, but they're table stakes, right? So above and beyond that, the question is, with the new Mars technologies that have become available, what combination of these three different E's, as we call them, right? So exchange, experience, and engagement. What is it that you can deliver to customers that will be unique, that will enable you? So it's not about, should I be on TikTok or not? It's not about, do I need a new attribution model or not? It's about, across the panoply of all of these things which are available to me, what is it that I can do differently in terms of delivering value to customers through one of these three E's or some combination of those, right? And one of the things I like most about when we showed this for the first time, we had a steering group of 12 CMOs who helped us with this work, and that we were bouncing kind of solutions and frameworks and tools off as we've gone through. One of them just kind of smiled when we got to this point and said, I think I told you that I didn't know what the options were. You just showed me what the options are. Now I can make a choice, right? Which I thought was pretty high praise. So one side of this talks about customer, marketing value proposition. The first piece of this says, using the new Mars-enabled technologies, what is it that I am able to, in which configuration of these things am I best able to create value for customers? In combination, not for each piece of technology at a time. Right? The second part of this talks about company value. And so company value talks about above and beyond what I deliver to customers, what is it that the marketing organization is going to do inside this organization and for this organization that will deliver value to the company? And so there are kind of three buckets, technical language, three buckets of value creation that's kind of internal to the company that marketing can offer. Right? So number one talks about strategic value. Right? And so you can think about this in terms of the contribution that marketing can play to enabling growth in the organization. And we can think about that in terms of building brand platforms. And when I talk about brand platforms, what I'm talking about here is creating brands that are capable of spanning categories. And, we used to build brands for categories, but what we're talking about here is making choices about the brand associations you want to create that will enable you to enter entirely new categories in some cases, right? And so we talk about branded platforms, we talk about revenue streaming. Revenue streaming, for example, is a classic, is there a way for us to make money out of things that we have to do in order to run our own business? And thirdly, the kind of business model innovation, which is, new forms of new ways for us to make money in the future. So a couple of examples. I think a great example of revenue streaming, which is really about taking stuff that you have to do anyway. Can you figure out ways to get somebody else to pay you for that, right? Poster child of this probably, Amazon Web Services, right? They had to build that in order to run their own business. Is there a way that we can make money by leasing that to other people? And I think Target's doing a nice job with Roundel, which is about effectively, creating a digital advertising channel within Target and selling both the placement and expertise to their vendors in order to be able to take part in that. Branded platforms, Airbnb, you start off as a classic lodging, and now you're into experiences, right? You're adding associations. You've built a brand that enables you to get into different categories further up or further down kind of the value chain. So strategic value, one way of thinking about, or one area in which marketing can add value to the organization. Number two talks about operational value, and operational value is kind of a really interesting one, I think. And we saw lots of different ways of trying to think about how can marketing add operational value to the organization. And what we're talking about here is enabling better coordination and enabling better links, not just within the marketing organization, but between the marketing organization and other partner parts of the organization. And I will include in that kind of members of the ecosystem, not just within the formal boundaries of the organization, right? So someone, I'll share a couple of quotes with you as you go through this stuff, but somebody said some interesting things about, if you try and manage marketing just on the basis of the people who report to you, then you're probably going to fail. Because the extent to which you rely on others, both outside of the organization and other parts of the organization, in order to be able to just do what you do, has gone up kind of exponentially, right? So it's no longer good enough just to think about managing your folks. You got to think about this bigger picture, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about operational value, right? Adding value through links. So some things that we've observed, the different organizations trying different things, right? And I'll tell you, I don't think anybody's cracked the code here, but some things that struck us as being particularly new ways of thinking about this stuff, right? So number one talks about creating a doctrine or a common way for people inside the organization, both inside the marketing organization and the broader organization, to know how it was that marketing is creating value for the organization, right? So what's different about marketing at this organization versus another organization. And so people talk about that in terms of a doctrine, or your way of demand creation, your kind of model, but a lot of this is about enabling people to understand how what they do in your marketing organization fits with what other people in the marketing organization do and what other people outside of the marketing organization do. Right? So we're talking about things like shared frameworks. We're talking about common methods that are used in different, so even if you're within different functional specialisms, within marketing, different technical specialisms, then you use the same language in the same way. You have a common framework for understanding where your role fits relative to somebody else's in the same organization, right? And a lot of this, and one of the things that we figured pretty early was, if you want people to be able to coordinate and to be efficient at what they do, and to help add value, then you have to have frameworks to help them make sense of where they are, where they fit, what they're, not just what they're responsible for, but how what they do impacts others in the organization. Right? And so common frameworks, kind of agnostic as to what they are, but you need some common framework. This struck us as really new, and we talk about key behavioral indicators. Everybody has a KPI. Everybody knows what KPIs are. Key behavioral indicators are kind of a version of that, but they're kind of to do with the culture in some ways, right? Either in an abstract way or in a very concrete and manifest way. And so a digital retailer that we worked with said there is no way to get collaboration at the level and the speed that you need inside of a marketing organization and not just within it, but with others in the company and with partners, vendors, etc. There is no way to do that unless people have a very high degree of trust in each other. And if you believe that that's true, then why aren't you evaluating in people's performance reviews? Why aren't you evaluating the extent to which they engender trust in others? Because everything else falls apart if you don't have that. Right? Your ability to hit whatever your KPIs are in an organization as complex as this, just not going to happen. And so that's what they did. They incented and rewarded and evaluated. There was a specific question in all performance reviews, the extent to which this individual engenders trust. Shared data and numbers. We can talk about DMPs and CDPs and data lakes. What really matters from a cultural perspective, but also from an operational one, remember these are just different parts of operating value. What really matters from that perspective is the extent to which people have access to shared data. Right? Everybody pulls from the same data, and everybody applies the same definitions and operationalizations of the same things. So when I talk about engagement, it's the same as when someone over here in the organization talks about engagement. It means the same thing, it's measured in the same way, you're pulling off the same data set. And I have to say, one of the nicest stories we heard about this was Adobe. Adobe, I think, is a really good example of a company that kind of walks the talk. The CEO at Adobe, until they got to a point where they had what they called I think it was called a single source of truth, where everyone in the organization was pulling from the same data set, measuring things in the same way. It wasn't different groups of people showing up at meetings with their own data sets and their own definitions of how things got measured and then arguing with each other. It wasn't until they had the shared data and the shared numbers that things really started to click for Adobe. And to the extent that the CEO got to the point where he said, I don't have to go to all the meetings anymore. Because I used to be refereeing stuff. I don't have to go to all the meetings anymore. Now they're sharing the same data and the same numbers and trust each other. Now I can trust them to make the right decisions. Right? And connected incentives. Connected incentives is doesn't mean paying everyone on everything, but connected incentives means if I as an individual or as a team understand how the people who I serve or who serve me or where my work product goes, if I understand how they're incented and rewarded, then I'm better able to make coordination decisions and to understand where trade-offs need to be made. So it kind of, again, you kind of the operational linkages, cultural stuff is a big piece of that, plus the kind of the shared single source of truth stuff. And lastly, knowledge value. Knowledge value is probably the easiest one to talk about in a sense, because knowledge value is about bringing new insights into the organization and adding value to the organization. The marketing org adding value by bringing new knowledge, right? And lots of us have gotten excited about over the past 10 years, big data, velocity, veracity, all that stuff, right? And bringing in data analysis skills and new algorithms and tools and techniques and all of that good stuff. But our argument is that's a kind of a necessary but not sufficient condition. And where you can actually add the most value, we would argue, is not just by pulling data together and analyzing it, but is creating new data. One of the phrases I've hated most over the last decade is, data is the new oil. And so one of my responses to that is, well, if you're a CMO and data is the new oil, why aren't you drilling? Why are you buying data from others? Why aren't you creating new data? And because if you can create new data in ways that others are not doing in your industry, then that enables you to get to generate new insights, and that adds huge value to the organization kind of as a whole, right? And so this is an example I kind of like because it's funny. Zozo Suit, right? So Zozo Suit has created this body type suits with 350 fiducial markers on them, and the idea was you put this thing on, it's got all these markers on, you do a twirl on your camera, on your smartphone camera, and we'll be able to size you very, very accurately. And you know, Zozo Zozo Suit is one of the largest apparel retailer in Japan. And but what's interesting about this is that Zozo Suit was not about trying to sell you customized suits, but if they had your precise measurements before anybody else did, and they could tell you, because for whatever set of reasons in the apparel industry, everybody's sizing is different. So if you buy a pair of jeans from, you know, Wrangler, it's different from not your mother's jeans, the same size, different fits. They were able to tell you, you know, if you're going to buy this brand of jeans, this is the size you need. If you're going to buy that brand of jackets, this is the size you need. And you think about the kind of the competitive advantage value you get if you have that customer data and before anybody else. Because how many different times does a consumer want to do this and do a twirl in front of a camera, right? And when they started this, they had 1 million suit requests in Japan in the first 3 months of doing it, right? And you back to our friends at Coca-Cola, the Freestyle. Is this a vending machine? Well, yes, it is. Is it also a data machine? Yes, it is. And enables you to generate new insights, which flavors are particularly being used more or less. How much does it go up and down depending on the temperature? Different parts of the country, different channels. I mean, all of that is kind of insight data that wouldn't necessarily be available to others. And so we started to use this language about, you know, in the same way as we talk about media being paid, shared, earned, and owned, we should think about data exactly that same way, right? And it's not just about how you use the data you've already got or what data you're able to get from third parties and combine it. It's also about the data that you're able to generate in kind of new ways. And if you can do that kind of at different points of the customer journey, then it becomes even more valuable both to the marketing organization but to the company as a whole, right? Nice example of this, I think, is kind of Vail Resorts, where they are able to combine, because they've got RFID kind of tags in the ski passes and stuff across their resorts. But they also combine that with both customer search data in terms of how they got to them and selected to go to a property in the first place, but also through the social, you know, people when they go skiing or when they go with other people, they take photographs. Well, Vail is able to figure out which are Vail properties or not and to pull that data together. So you get kind of a single point where you can combine different pieces of data, which is unique to you, right? This is data that you have that others do not. And that gives you the potential to generate new insights, again, not just for the marketing organization, but for the entire company, right? So we talk about these kind of 3 areas of kind of company value, the combination of these things, whether you're going to major in one, minor in another, the combination of these things that marketing can select among to build this value proposition on the company side of the equation. So you've got the customer side of the equation, and then you've got the company side of the equation, and you put those things together, and you have what we call a marketing value proposition, right? And the marketing value proposition, if you go back to where I started, is about negotiating, agreeing what you want the destination to look like. Because once you understand what your marketing value, what your desired marketing value proposition is, then you start to be able to ask much smarter questions about, okay, what do we need in order to make that work, and how do we get there from here, right? So marketing value proposition, kind of stage 1 of this stuff. So if I'm, and we've worked with, kind of piloted with 5 different companies. We're now doing some consulting with a whole bunch of other companies on the back of this stuff, so if I just kind of walk you, and I'm conscious of the time, I want to leave some time for questions, but I just want to walk you kind of quickly through both the process and some of the tools that we have built and are built in the process of building to kind of help you navigate through these kinds of steps, right? So step number 1, select your marketing value proposition, customer side, kind of company side, and so if you think about the kind of the key questions you have to answer in order to be able to select among the various ways in which you can create value for customers, then the 4 fundamental questions you have to answer. So number 1 says, how are customer value expectations changing in your marketplace? Both in terms of the 3 E's that we talked about, you know, exchange, experience and engagement, but also, you know, product and price and all those kinds of things as well. how well is your organization and your brand, depending on how you're organized, performing against those kinds of expectations? And then which groups of which customers need to believe or experience what about your product or service offering in order for you to hit your growth objectives? Because increasingly, marketing's now not about brand management, it's about growth management. And what does that look like when you articulate it in terms of a new customer value proposition? Right? In this Mars-enabled world, what's your value proposition going to be for which groups of customers in order to be able to hit your growth objectives? What does that kind of look like? And so if I ask a quick question, and it just a kind of hand raise kind of poll, how many of you are confident that your marketing organization has clear and agreed on answers to all 4 questions? How customer value expectations are changing, how well you're performing against those expectations, articulation of which groups of customers need to experience and believe what about your product service offering in order for you to hit your growth objectives, and clearly articulated value propositions for customer groups against that. Right? Quick hand poll on that stuff, and we'll see how many of you are. And I have to tell you, I don't think we in our work have come across an organization that says check, 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 check. So what do we got to try and help you with this stuff? Here's what we've developed so far, because this has evolved from kind of a framework where we had the CMO steering group saying, yes, this is it. Now tell us how to do it. and then we started working on kind of the tool set, if you like, in order to make this tractable problem for folks. So what we have, what we've developed at this point is we have a customer value equation survey, where we have a kind of what I call a light version of this stuff, where we've got kind of both the new 3E sources of value enabled by the Mars stuff, plus all the foundational stuff as well. And we're using kind of the max diff question formats. So for those of you who are on the research side of the house, you can think about that kind of like conjoint, get them to make kind of trade-off choices, so that we can identify the most important value drivers in terms of determining customer choices. And we piloted this across 10 different categories. Just to get some sense of the extent to which these new sources of value creation that we've identified, how important those are across different categories, right? And we're also, because we're now working on this from a consulting perspective, we're developing a more detailed version of that that's just for individual clients, as opposed to trying to kind of figure stuff out more generally, right? And so I'll give you a quick example in terms of retail banking. And these are kind of marginal utilities, so the probability of driving choice. And this is a light version of this stuff. And what's interesting is, like, the individual items don't really matter, but what's kind of interesting to me is, I always think about retail banking as kind of a boring industry. Sorry for those of you who are in the banking industry, but it turns out that in terms of probability of driving choice, the value creation in terms of the new areas above and beyond the foundational, product, service, quality stuff and price, that's the foundational bucket. 72% of choice on average being driven by sources of value creation that are within these new Mars-enabled parts of the equation, which is kind of surprising to me. I think the average across the 10 categories that we looked at was about 60%. And so 60% is a lot. I mean, if you've got data showing that drives choice, 60% of it is coming from these newly enabled categories of value creation, then you better have a clearly articulated value proposition against those things, and not just against the traditional product and price and service pieces. Right. And so here's kind of an example of how you can use some of that insight from the measurement tool piece of it to say, what do I want my value proposition to look like? Where do I need to be a parity with others? And what are the 1 or 2 things that I'm going to try and leverage or own in order to drive choice? Because A, because I think they're important in terms of driving choice in the marketplace, but B, because I think these are things that this organization can credibly choose to deliver and stand a reasonable chance of activating against. So you've got kind of the customer value side, and then we can talk about the company side of this. And in the same way as I give you kind of a list of questions you have to ask and answer from the customer perspective, here's the same kind of the questions that you have to ask and answer from the internal perspective. So if I think about these three buckets by which the marketing organization can deliver value to the company as a whole, kind of the strategic bucket, the operational bucket, and the knowledge bucket, you know, which ones you're going to major in, which ones you're going to minor in. Right? It would be nice if you were able to do everything, but at least in the short and medium term, you're not going to be able to. So which of these things are you going to major and minor in for your company? And how well are you performing against those things, both in terms of marketing organization's role in delivering that for the organization, but also as the organization as a whole. Right? And if you think about that from a marketing perspective, the marketing org, what does that look like in terms of you know, in the same way as we talk about a customer value equation or a customer value proposition, what does that look like for an inside the company value proposition for the marketing organization? An ability to clarify and articulate this is the way in which we're going to add these types of value to the organization as a whole, above and beyond what we do in terms of customers. And in the same way as, and by the way, some of these things, this is about decision rights. You know, we're gonna own the knowledge piece, but that doesn't mean that the strategic piece doesn't need to happen, but maybe it doesn't need to be us that does it. So if we're not going to do it, it's who else in the organization is going to do it, or there has to be a strategic choice that says this is not something we're going to do at all. Right? So, same question. How many of you are confident that you have those things in your organization, that you're able to answer each of these four questions? I'm even more confident that the answer is 0 to these set of 4 questions than to the previous set of 4 questions, because I'm pretty sure this has never been articulated in this way in any marketing organization that we've engaged with and worked with. And so what have we got to help on this side, on what we call the company value equation side? I'll show you in a second. We've kind of developed a list of what we believe to be the capabilities that enable each of these 6 areas of value creation on the customer side, and 3 of them on the company side, right? And so we've taken those underlying capabilities associated with each of these 3 on the company side, each of these three areas of value creation, and we've simply gotten, we've workshopped with the senior marketing teams at I think 5 organizations now. Kind of, you know, who does this? What is marketing's responsibility versus not? And which ones do we think represent the biggest opportunities, right? Just as a way of trying to prioritize what it is that marketing is going to own, and the things that marketing is going to have to do in order to be able to make that real inside the organization as a source of value creation kind of for the company, right? And we're now at a point where, again, from a consulting perspective, we're working on a kind of a more formal tool kind of for operationalizing that, but this has worked really well for the 5 organizations that we've worked with. This has worked really well in terms of kind of crystallizing some of the thinking to such an extent that for one of them, we were even able to create a marketing organization value proposition that they went and then shared with the C-level folks and kind of got buy-off on that. Right? So you can think about kind of this marketing value proposition visualization in this kind of a way among these 6 areas of value creation: 3 on the customer side, 3 on the company side. Right? So you can now, I think you know what the options are. If you can make those choices, you're now in a position where you can articulate this is what marketing's value proposition is for the company and for customers. Right? And if you can articulate that, you take one step back and abstract a little bit. What you're now able to do is you're able to articulate in an agreed upon way, because you share it with people as you go through and get buy-off on it. You're able to articulate in an agreed upon way what your destination is. This is what we want to look like. This is where we want to get to. And until you have an articulation of that, then you can't figure out how do you get there from here, right? So you've got the articulation of that. The rest of it becomes a bit more straightforward because now you're trying to figure out where are we starting from and how do we get to be able to deliver that marketing value proposition. And so, this is a kind of an eye chart, but what you see here are, the company side, customer side, the three sources of value creation on each side, and underpinning that we have 72 specific marketing capabilities, each of which are connected with, and not only connected with that one value area, but that are particularly important for delivering that value area. And when we showed this for the first time to the MMA board members, actually some of them said, I don't need any more. Because now you've helped me figure out the things that my marketing organization should be doing, because I think I need to do all of these, and took that away, which is fine. And so what we have developed on the back of that, so if you want to assess your fit, if you have your marketing value proposition articulated, the question is, what capabilities do you need in order to be able to deliver that? And we can help you connect or identify what those capabilities that are most important to delivering each of those 6 components are. How well are you currently performing those things? Good, bad, indifferent. Where are the biggest gaps between what you're currently doing and what you need to do well in order to be able to deliver your marketing value proposition? And those gaps, by the way, are both positive and negative, and that's important for a reason I'll show you in a second. And lastly, what does that mean you need to do more of or better? But also, what does it mean you need to do less of? Right? I'll repeat something I said earlier: more of everything is not a strategy. This is about prioritization, and prioritization means not just things that you're going to do better, but also some things that maybe you choose to stop doing, or you outsource, or you automate, because you have to free up time and resources in order to be able to focus on the things that are the biggest priorities for you to build in order to be able to deliver your value proposition. And so, I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to bother with the kind of the poll piece of this. So what have we got? What have we got at the moment is a benchmarking tool. These 72 individual capabilities that we've identified and been able to calibrate help deliver these 6 areas of value for the marketing value proposition. And so what we have done so far in working with folks on this stuff is to ask a series of questions about how well do you do this and these things, and how important are each one in order for you to deliver on your growth objectives. Right? And we're actually getting to a point where we can start to make this a kind of a data-driven thing in terms of being able to tell people which are the most important. But in order to seed this stuff, we've started with kind of, what do you think are the most important? How well are you doing these things? And by the way, you think self-assessments don't work? I can tell you I've been studying marketing capabilities across organizations for the past 25 years, and self-assessments of marketing capabilities predict outcomes. Are they noisy? Yes. Maybe people overestimate to some degree, but they produce data that you can use in order to predict outcomes, and I and others have done that across multiple studies. Right? And so what this enables you to do, this benchmarking, is to kind of produce visual kind of outputs that help people prioritize, right? And so we created a light version of this that I'll share with you in a second, that we're using in order to be able to collect benchmark data across. We're starting with 10 different industries. But B, it also helps people get some idea without having to go the whole hog and get into kind of consulting stuff, right? So and I'll show you that in a second, right? And so this is kind of what the output looks like, right? So this is the kind of the visual output that you get. The kind of the satisfaction score is about how well are you doing these things. The fit score is about how well are you doing on the things that matter most in order to be able to deliver on your growth objectives, right? And so now you've got kind of an internal view, the benchmarking stuff, an external view, the customer value equation stuff that we're able to bring to bear to help figure out which are the things you need to do more of, which are the things you need to do less of, and which are the things you need to maintain, right? And so I can show you, the different visualizations. Turns out folks respond better to visual applications of this data when we have worked with them, and it's different across companies. But also, this is probably a better idea, give you a better idea. And this is a real company, but we've disguised the numbers. And so what you see here on this, the legend at the bottom is kind of the orange area here, what the marketing value proposition is. So that's the destination. That's what they want to look like. That's the choice, the strategic choice they've made about how to deliver value to customers and deliver value to the company. And what you see inside in kind of the blue shape is the kind of where are they starting from, right? So using the benchmarking tool, what is it that, where are they starting from? And so in this particular example, you will see, for example, in the exchange value area, actually pretty low on the personalization, right? So 53% prediction. I remember now. This company, their ability to track the customer journey and their ability to predict what customers were looking for and when they were looking for it, really, really low. And that turned out to be the #1 priority thing that they were that they needed to go work on, right? And so I've got a couple of other examples here, but so that's kind of what, just a visual look at what this looks like. Once you know what your destination is, now you've got some benchmarking data. Now you can start to ask sensible questions about how do we prioritize? What are we going to work on? What are we not going to work on? And so the step 3 then talks about kind of design your change. And what we use this for is, the importance to be able to deliver my value proposition on the one axis, the where I'm starting from on the other, and kind of we have this thing in the middle that we call the fit line, right? And so there are things that you need to, transform. So you can think about, above and below the line, the things that you need to get better at. Also things that you can reform. So that's really about things that you are going to stop doing or automate or outsource to free up people and to free up resources in order to be able to work on the stuff you really need to improve the most. But there's also an important line here, which is things that are kind of close to the fit line. These are things that are important, but you're delivering at about the right levels. And everybody talks about transformation. It's really important to know what you want to keep, not necessarily spend more on or do more of or get better at, but things that you want to keep. Just because you can change things doesn't always mean that you should. And so these are things that you don't want to change, right? We can tell you which things you need to change. We can tell you which things that you need to reform in terms of freeing up resources or time. But it's also important to know what you want to keep, particularly when transformation is going on everywhere. And so we can talk about, giving you then a list of kind of what your MarCap's priorities are. And the kind of the back end of this, if you know where you're going and you know where you're starting from and you've got some prioritization, then then this becomes kind of a change management exercise, and we've done a bunch of this. I think we've walked 5 organizations through this now in terms of working on this stuff, right? So that's kind of what the process now looks like. So at that point, I'm going to say I wanted to leave 15 minutes, but I've ended up leaving 10. And so I'll turn it over so that people can kind of ask some questions, and then I want to kind of finish up by talking just quickly about kind of the light version of the benchmarking tool that I'd like to encourage folks to kind of try and use. And I see Kate on my screen. That means she's back.
Yeah. Yes. We have some questions coming out in the chat, and I encourage others to submit their questions. I don't know if you can see them. I'm happy to pose them. Linda asks, if tech eats strategy for lunch, how does the marketing department partner with tech for effective organizational design?
Yeah, okay.
Great question.
That's a nice question. And when I say tech is eating strategy, what I really mean is that if marketing has a pot of money, how do you avoid the challenge? When I say tech is eating strategy, what I really mean is short-term, measurable, outcome-based activities. And so, the poster child for this is attribution modeling, right? And so that's not a tech department thing. That's a use of technology thing within marketing. And so this is not about tech department versus marketing department. This is about how you use technology within marketing. And how do you avoid the temptation, and it's a temptation for everyone, but it's particularly a temptation for CFOs and CMOs when they, budget constrained. How do you avoid the temptation to only be spending things where you can observe measurable outcomes when you know there are other things that you need to do for the medium and the longer term, right? And that's the tension. It's not between tech and marketing, it's between measurable marketing versus stuff that's difficult to measure, right? Just because it's difficult to measure doesn't mean it isn't important and that you don't want to be spending time and money on it. That's the internal battle that that I was kind of talking about when I say tech is equal strategy.
Linda, as a follow-up, I would actually press this further, because in some firms like retail, technology department is indeed encroaching on the customer decision-making process. Did you see any of that in the companies and leaders that you spoke to?
This you know, this is one of the reasons that we've been beating people over the head with this. This is one of the reasons that we think you really need a marketing value proposition, not just that articulates to your folks in the marketing department who is responsible for what and why and how you're going to create value in those areas, but also it needs to be a shared upon understanding of other areas within the organization too, right? We can talk about decision rights, but until you have an idea about how what you're trying to do on behalf of the company, it's really, I mean, otherwise tech will invade. I mean, it just will. And until you can have an articulation, because until you can articulate it, you can't argue about it, right? And particularly because a lot of this stuff has to get resolved between CIO and CMO. And if the CMO is saying your folks are sticking their fingers in my pie, that's a whole different argument than saying here's what the marketing value proposition that the C-suite has agreed. This is your piece of that. That whole different argument. I see the response. Tech abhors a vacuum. Absolutely. So don't give them a vacuum.
That's great. Any other questions? Oh yeah, in your CPG example just now, the company was lowest on exchange value as personalization. Isn't this to be expected? Won't different types of big companies need to compete on different dimensions?
Yes. So, but if you think about the numbers that I shared, were not just how well do you do these things, but how good is the fit between how well you do it and how well you need to do it, given the choice that you've made about how to compete, right? And again, I agree with Earl. Different companies will compete in different ways. And within large companies, even some brands within the company will compete in different ways. And so this is not about how well do you do something, it's about how well do you do something relative to how well you need to do it in order to be able to execute the value proposition that you have signed up for.
Great.
Oh, I should ask, so one question that somebody asked me, I was talking to someone before this, I knew I should be preparing for this, but I was talking to somebody before this, and they reminded me of a question that we've gotten on this in a couple of bigger companies where they operate across categories and they have multiple brands in each category. And so their question was, as a company, as a brand, you can choose different value propositions, both, you know, from a customer perspective. As a company, the marketing org may serve multiple different brands in multiple different categories. And so if you've got different brands in different categories making different choices about how they want to compete for customers, then what we think, and I'll give you one example of this in a second, but what we think is ultimately those organizations, marketing organizations, are going to have to evolve to having what we call a 3-stack capability, which is the ability to support brands on both, you know, exchange, experience, and engagement value in the combinations that they choose. And I think, very few companies have figured that out, and very few companies have got, probably no companies have gotten there. Probably the closest that we have seen, I would say, is probably Nike. Right? I think Nike is on its way to being, now whether they articulate in this way or think about it this way, I think Nike is on its way to being what we would call kind of a 3-stack marketing organization, where they're competing in different ways in different categories with different brands, making different choices, but needing the marketing org to enable the brands to be able to compete in those ways by giving them the capabilities in each of those kind of 3 E's of the buckets. Right? So I can see there's only 2 or 3 minutes left. And so one thing I was going to share with you was, and I made this part of the pre-work, but for those of you who didn't do it, I'm going to encourage you to do it now. The light version of the benchmarking report that we have, I think we have had about 200 folks do this so far. If you're interested, then if you take the kind of the light version of our benchmarking tool, and that's the kind of the URL there, that's actually going to do 2 things. Number one is it'll take us a couple of weeks, but we'll actually feed back to you a kind of a customized benchmarking report. And you know, the little visualization there shows you kind of the graphics that you'll kind of get back. But number 2 is we'll also, and this is, you know, going to be anonymous data or anonymized data. So we're also going to take that and pool it, and we're going to create and we're working with the MMA on this now. We're going to create a state of the marketing organization kind of a report that draws on this as one of the kind of the primary data sources as we go forward. So encourage you to do that. If you take it in the next 7 days, it's going to close at that point. Take it in the next 7 days, we'll get you a kind of a complimentary benchmarking report and get that back to you. And it'll give you some idea, a little bit more detail on kind of some of the individual capabilities that I was talking about that underpin each of the 6 kind of value creation areas that I kind of shared with you on the customer and the company side as we've gone through this stuff.
That's great. Thank you so much, Neil, for this great presentation and for everyone for joining us. There was so much information there, and I know this topic is important now more than ever and is of interest to so many of our members. So with that, we'll be posting a version of this on our website, so keep an eye on your email. So if you want to share with your team members who may have missed the session today. We'll also be sure to send the link directly to that benchmarking survey. So if anyone didn't get the chance to do it, they'll have the time over the next 7 days and hear back from Neil. And then with that, Neil's information, and we are also very happy to connect you directly with him if you want to kind of dig deeper on any of these questions. Academics make great partners, and Neil is a wonderful resource. So especially if you have data to share, you know, you're interested in tackling some of these big questions, Neil or others within his network, I'm sure, would be happy to explore some of those collaboration projects. So just reach out to us at MSI and happy to make that connection. So thanks everybody for joining. Thank you again to Neil, and everybody please stay safe and healthy. Have a great day.
Thanks.